Please welcome to the stage Mike Sarasti and Mike Wheeler.
Good morning. It's still morning. Morning, everybody. How are we feeling? Hey, what's up, friends? How's everybody today? Saw some of you yesterday. Round of applause for Mark Wheeler.
That's fine. I'm here. You can read my badge later.
Yeah, so we're going to do, some of you were here yesterday. This is the second part of a blockchain in cities. It's really a recap of an 18-month journey that Mark and I have been on trying to find real-life applications in municipal government sort of within this whole blockchain space. Today we're going to be talking, yesterday we did a Beyond the Hype, Blockchain in Cities, which is a little bit more internally focused about how cities adapt. Today's conversation is a little bit different. We're going to be talking more about community today. We're going to be talking about just how organizations run in general, because we're talking about decentralized autonomous organizations, DAOs. So why is this important to municipal government? We happen to think that cities, governments, elected officials should be thinking about this a lot, because it's coming to a lot of other organizations, and eventually we're going to have to contend with this in cities.
Yep. So this is not going to be a primer on DAOs, but what we'll say is up front that this is about how you make decisions, how you govern, how you can vote, and it's a new way of doing this type of work. It's going to have to take a completely different approach and mindset and steps to do it in government. And the reason we pulled this specific panel together is because these are individuals who have actually done community networking, community engagement. They've worked in or for governments, or they've scaled and developed communities for businesses. So I'd like to bring to the stage now Karla Ballard, CEO of YING. Dyshaun Hines, CEO of METRODAO. Arul Murugan, Chairman and Founding Managing Partner of Borderless Capital. And Sandy Skelaney, Adjunct Professor, Florida International University.
Thank you. You're supposed to dance on your way in, Sandy.
Oh, I'm going to go down here.
We're fine.
Pass that down to Sandy.
Sure. All right. So we're going to start off, Karla. You're a CEO of YING. You've done community building. You're from the Germantown area of Philadelphia. We got a lot of Philadelphians representing at this conference and on this panel. Tell us more about YING, the DAO structure. Give us some idea about the DAO. And as far as I understand, YING is about matching skills for volunteering at the community level?
Okay, so thank you so much, Mark. Really happy to be here. My name is Karla Ballard, and founder and CEO of YING, which is a peer-to-peer group skill sharing platform. We are so passionate about building a culture that cares that we focused on creating a way for people to easily get access to help, and also to be able to share their skills. And so one of the things that I'll share a little bit about my background. I just finished running, interestingly enough, in the 2020 election. A lot of people don't know that, on the independent ticket with Brock Pierce, who's the chairman of the Bitcoin Foundation. We don't believe in running against anyone, so we ran with both Trump and Biden, and with Akon and Brittany Kaiser, as a way to send out a message of the next generation: don't give up on our democracy. I also was the National Urban League's Young Professional first female president over X amount of decades ago, and so I'm used to working in a governance fashion where we were standing up chapters all around the country. One of the key things that I'm really excited about as it relates to the DAO, which is a decentralized autonomous organization. That's the definition of it, or I should say that's the spelling of the DAO, D-A-O, is really to create a new way of governing. Now, I can't say this is going to be something that's adopted immediately, but the idea is to democratize this ability to have people who you're aiming to engage literally digitally vote on a blockchain where you cannot change that vote. That's massively important. So what we do with YING and what we're planning on rolling out on next Wednesday, the 21st in Philadelphia, is something called villaging. We want to bring back the essence of being in community again, sharing the skills that we have, identifying what opportunities there are in a really festive way. And what's exciting is we begin to take tiny steps towards how can I now actively be engaged within some of the decisions in my community. And so we're going to have levels to a DAO and also being able to engage in our platform where our group admins, because this is group skill sharing, have the ability to actually vote on the platform infrastructure, because that's important to engage community. And then we'll have another layer as well. We won't get into the technical too much because I don't want to assume you guys know all the platforms.
We'll get
but
into a
hopefully
little
this
bit
is a
of
good
that.
entrance.
So now you said something that might be terrifying for elected officials, which is we're going to change how governance works. I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but this is a new way of doing governance and government potentially. So Sandy, I'm going to turn it over to you because your PhD work, your work as an adjunct professor at Florida International University, this is what you're studying. You're studying the impact of how DAOs might work in practice, what this means for democracies. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about your interests and how you think this is relevant to all of us.
Okay, hi, I'm Sandy Skelaney. I have spent my career doing community organizing and participating in multidisciplinary collaborations, solving wicked problems, specifically human trafficking. I also teach a social entrepreneurial course at FIU, and I'm a PhD student in public administration focused on tech policy. Specifically, I'm researching DAO governance. And one of the things I find really fascinating is the use of blockchain technology to find new modes of collective action. And in this kind of studying of public administration and participation in public administration around collective action, we work in this world in a very complex system. We have very many layers of different stakeholders, processes, legacy, laws and policy that have to take place. The idea of a new kind of form of governance on a blockchain isn't something that we can really accept immediately as public administrators, right? There's going to be a lot of resistance towards that. However, what I find really interesting about the idea of DAOs emerging and really gaining in popularity is what it signals about the public sentiment. So what we're seeing is a disenchantment with government as it is. Trust in government is at an all-time low. People don't trust representatives. They want to be free from corruption, from capture of power by big corporations. They want to have their voice heard in policy, in legislative initiatives, in actions in the community. And I think that as we become more complex as a system, people are becoming more and more disenfranchised and feeling that way. And I think so the rise of DAOs as a kind of transparent, direct democracy kind of system where everybody that participates can be a part of it. I think that this is very appealing, and it will really signal like the future of government in general, what we should be looking at and how we should be adapting to get rid of kind of looking at hierarchies, getting rid of hierarchies, and really kind of transforming maybe in a hybrid way, right?
So this is interesting because we did a little bit of this yesterday too, where it's like, now we're talking about blockchain, and the term blockchain has the potential to eclipse some of these conversations that have really been happening for a long time. Yesterday's case, we were talking about open standards and open data. I think some of what you're saying as well is that this is an extension of governance work, policy work, but there are some real questions about trust in our institutions that people are currently asking, and this is sort of a response to that. So this is why we're paying attention, because DAOs are being presented as a potential solution to address this issue of trust within institutions. So there's a whole category of stuff there that I think we're going to unpack here in a bit. Arul, I want to turn to you, because you're actually thinking about DAOs in a way to scale projects. So can you talk a little bit about you and your work at Borderless Capital and how a DAO structure is helping scale work?
Thank you, Mike. So my background is I'm an entrepreneur for 20 plus years. I exited my business in 2016 and became a venture capitalist. So now we are managing about $600 million, investing in companies that are leveraging blockchain and Web3 business model. So we're very focused. And so in addition to managing it, I'm also kind of an entrepreneur and operator for a business where we deployed about 30,000 IoT devices across 35 countries and created one of the largest IoT wireless network. Some of you would have heard Helium. So Helium created a model how you incentivize people through the blockchain, and you get paid based on the IoT wireless network coverage or cellular coverage that you provide. So, and coming in terms of scaling, I think we as a venture capitalist, that's what we look at. So we're looking for companies that we can invest that can really scale. And so we measure our success on how we can help companies to scale. And what we have seen is that I think there is a path to decentralization. And so initially we form it as a centralized company. So now I would say in the last 1 year, we would have invested in about 30 plus companies, almost 36, I believe, where they are starting it as a DAO. And so the maturity level has increased. And so what we look at here is that the digital democracy. So I think probably even the topic I would suggest we could call digital democracy. That's what's really happening. And also how you are really incentivizing people to coordinate human behavior and decision making. So that's where we figure it out to see that it's not just for cause, because we have communities, I think we have clubs, people go and join. So when you create a DAO for a specific opportunity, truly how do you are incentivizing them? So the one thing I'm personally doing that here in Miami is creating the physical infrastructure in the low income area. So we're already working with the Mayor's Forest Office, Venture Miami, and several organizations. Mike is also helping us. What we're looking to see is that how can we put 1,000 5G devices in the low income area, along with that put air quality sensors, put weather stations. Because in Miami, we need to know the heat. That's a bigger problem. How do we know that? How do we coordinate this human activity among the organizations, among the individual people? And how do we reward the revenue that we're getting from this physical infrastructure back to the local community? How can we keep some reserve in the treasury? So as a community, we decide what's the next infrastructure project that we want to do. So now I think we get to the maturity where we can scale them. And so now we are talking about hundreds of millions of dollars of physical infrastructure that's been laid out. Now, not talking about virtual currencies or anything like that, actually. So I will leave it at that. Maybe in the next one, I can pick up more talking about the scalability.
Dyshaun, you've got a background in Philadelphia, bringing businesses together, working with civic organizations. There's governance and there's a lot of decision making that has to go into that effort to build a Philadelphia brand and recruit businesses and retention. And you've started MetroDAO as a startup. How are you tackling through the blockchain and MetroDAO? Is it a services type of orientation that you could provide to governments to actually use a DAO? And give us some background around that.
Right. It's essentially a tool. So as it was mentioned, my name is Dyshaun Hines. I'm the program director of the Philadelphia Global Identity Partnership by Day, which is a cross-sector coalition of organizations public-private organizations advancing Philadelphia's global brand narrative. Also, as mentioned, I am the CEO and founder of MetroDAO, which is a mobile app that's seeking to close the communication gap between civic leaders and communities to have more efficient social impact investment. So to your question, Mark, a lot of my experience within the public-private sector really led me to creating this company because of that communication gap. Honestly, from my perspective, a DAO isn't anything new, like most technologies. I hate to break it to you, but most people don't come up with new ideas. New ideas are very rare. We just kind of rehash and evolve existing ideas. So with the public-private sector, I very much view that as being directly correlated with what a DAO is. The simple idea is that you need a way to inform decisions by as many stakeholders as you possibly can in order to efficiently make the correct decision to impact the people around you. So a lot of my experience from the public-private sector has shown that, it's not to point fingers at any government or any individual actor, but there's a huge human error in what we're trying to accomplish with whether it's progressing technology or having better social impact and community investment strategies. So how do we solve that human error? The DAO becomes kind of an opportunity. I view it as just a tool to very much enhance systems that already exist, similar to participatory budgeting. If anyone is familiar with that, the simple idea of that is saying a group of organizations or a group of people, actors, are going to come together, put money into a central pot, and then find consensus around the idea that they're going to spend that money. All a DAO is saying, all right, well, here's a tool to help you accomplish that, to take away some of the human error.
So, Dyshaun, that's an interesting point. I think what you're saying, this is an iteration. This is not some transformative new thing. We're actually iterating on things that we've been doing for a while. I love your participatory budgeting thing, because we've been trying to do that in cities for a while. Karla, I'm going to come to you on something you said yesterday a little bit. I know that Mark was poking a little bit with this volunteerism question, so I'm going to come back to it in a second, because it came up in our pre-call. The thing that I think is different about that is the iteration is this idea of representing ownership on-chain via tokens. So I gave this definition yesterday. It's not mine, on Web3, which is Web 1. The first iteration of the internet, we were able to read things online. That was it. Web 2, we were able to read and write, which is why we can all make posts on social media, and we're now contributors on the web. Web 3 lets us own things represented by these tokens. And I think what we're talking about now is getting into this idea of orchestrating behavior through these DAOs and incentivizing certain kinds of behavior, which again, we've been doing in government for a while. We've talked about nudge theory for a bit and how we nudge people to do certain behaviors that we want, the way that we design streets, etc. Among the tension I have thinking about this, that there's this continuum where now we're paying people, or we're talking about paying people for engagement. I'm not saying that we haven't had to do this, gift cards, things that we've done over time, so it's also not new. But we talk about volunteerism a lot in the civic tech space, right? Where come and volunteer. Community work is often relegated to volunteer space. And then on the other side is now we're going to be paying people to vote. So this is a continuum that we're exploring now on DAO. So Karla, I want you to talk a little bit about how you feel about volunteerism, acknowledgement one more time, and then Sandy, I know you've thought about this a lot, so we'll cue over to you.
Sure. So thank you for that, Mike. I think I was a former banker. I worked at MBNA America, and so I know the power of currency. Currency is very powerful. 5,000 years ago, we started this whole journey towards cowrie shells and cows and all this type of ways to interact with each other and denote that through some type of currency. So we have been wired, guys, even neurologically, to move based off of what can I get from this transaction, period. That's just sort of where we're at right now. A lot of us have come because we were getting paid, potentially, to come to sit right here.
So altruism is a lie, is what you're saying.
There is the intrinsic, though, side of us, right, that is motivated by things and people we care about. That's, in many ways, called affinity groups. Things that I have an affinity towards, I'm motivated to do. So if I live in my neighborhood, yes, I am so proud to be from Germantown, right? So if there is something going down in my neck of the woods, I will absolutely show up, period. Now, that's because of the affinity. So if I start to talk about civic engagement or volunteerism, and I'm so glad that you brought that. Because for me, having spent 6 years of my life in Congress Park in Washington, D.C., and working in West Philly and just being from Germantown, I've heard from our residents, right, that they are a little sick and tired of people just coming down to the neighborhood and saying, I'm going to volunteer. It's a very privileged position to come and volunteer and then disappear 5 years later. So I promised, especially the folks that I was working with and created friendships with still in my life over 20 years ago, is I will not say that word again, because I know how much it triggers you. And instead, I decided to adopt this idea of skill sharing, because as far as they're concerned, every bit of work is of value. The fact that you're going to volunteer in a community, that community also has value. So as far as it was coming back to me, is that we're going to co-produce solutions together. We'll be co-producers together. You come to my neighborhood, we're going to co-produce a solution. We're going to skill share. And so instead of us using volunteering, we chose to use skill sharing, because all work, all time, is also very important in terms of, especially as it relates to building community.
And that's the thing that now these tokens enable on-chain.
Absolutely.
Because you can do that.
We're actually now valuing that time, correct.
Yeah.
I just want to make a summary point, though, that the distinction that we're making, and this goes back to the conversation yesterday, is that the ownership of the token and the tokens accumulate is how we're going to measure my contribution in terms of value, how the community measures collective contributions, and that those tokens can move with me. It's part of the
By the way,
Web3
that's
ownership.
data, right?
Right.
When I presented at CES years ago, I was invited by, oh my gosh, it's a large ad agency. And one of the things that they said to me is, Karla, you're collecting new data that we do not have right now. And that's within social capital and community capital. So let's also focus on that. We don't have that as a city. How much social capital, how many transactions as it relates to me building my community are we even tracking? And we're not. And so that's what we're able to do now.
First of all, I love what you're doing. And I really can envision this being that public-private partnership when we're trying to do things in the community in conjunction with government, but then we often work with nonprofit organizations, which can also be captured by elite forces, right? So we need to look at how can we democratize the community work that's being done, and in partnership with DAOs like yours, we could do something like that, right? And that's incredible. So one of the things I noticed with the DAOs, though, is that even within the DAOs, it's a little bit of privilege to be able to participate, because participation takes time. It takes, you don't have to be working full-time with kids and all these other things. You have to be in there voting, paying attention to the conversations, the policies, the protocols that are being amended. So that in itself is one of the big issues that DAOs are seeing now that we are becoming bigger, more complex, things like that. So the interesting things is that we're innovating, and this is something I think public administrators can also keep their eyes on, is how we're using technology to innovate on some of those processes that are very complicated and lack engagement by the public, like voting. So, one of the things that we are looking at right now is deliberation, okay? DAOs are very much into, here's a big platform, everybody can join, and then you can vote, right? How do we break it down to, are there going to be certain core people that are building, certain core people that are voting? Are we actually creating boundaries like that? Are we going to put deliberation layers in and possibly bring in concepts such as citizen assemblies?
Well, these are government policy decisions that we've been wrestling with for years. Right. So I've seen this too in like DAOs that I participate in, where it's like something's up for vote yes or no, and it's like 51%, 49%. This is terrifying. If this is like this is a very, very simplified version about the way that real policy does or should get developed. Maybe sometimes it's too complex, but there's a whole new conversation happening about that deliberation layer that I love. I'm going to have you come back to that, hopefully, if we got some time. Arul, let's talk about voter turnout as well, which I think is a great point, because some of these same issues that we have in the real world are emerging in the metaverse, right? They are the same kinds of issues, but I think you had some examples early on where you do have a fair amount of participation. And because we're at a smart city conference, I think there was another piece as well where you're talking about these nodes that might be at the edge now, and the DAO, instead of us as cities thinking about how and where these are going to be deployed, how they might be governed, a DAO provides a mechanism that if you're going to put a camera on a street corner somewhere, the DAO might, it's not the city deciding how that information might be get distributed, but can you talk a little bit about a couple of those things on voter turnout and sort of this decision-making on the nodes that you're deploying?
Yeah, I think I'm going to go with very key data points, so you know that these are real. So what I did is that yesterday I first did a poll. So I picked like 4 DAOs. These are all blockchain-based DAOs that people have done, and asked them like what they believe is the best in terms of democracy and governance. So it's really good. I think the vote turned out like almost 92% for Algorand. And I think I always say like Miami is very favor of Algorand. I think there are many things they have sponsored, so I'm glad to see Algorand coming up. Here is what I think is a data point. We are talking about more than 50,000 governors. We're not talking about like, hey, there are 20 governors or 50 or 100 governors. There are 50,000 governors who have locked in more than $1 billion into the blockchain, real value of $1 billion, even at this current market. It used to be like $2 to $3 billion when the market was up. In the current bear market, it still represents $1 billion. And as of now, 32,600 governors have already voted. So they do the voting on a quarterly basis. Sometimes they do multiple. And so here is what in real things, and how are they motivating people to vote? So basically what's saying is that, okay, you go and lock your algo. Algo is a currency that's used in Algorand. It's almost like you're putting it into the savings account. When you put in your bank, you are getting almost less than 0.1% because banks keeps most of it. Here, you are getting like 6 to 8% back because they take the money that's put in and it's putting into a decentralized lending protocol. Whatever the earning that's coming back, it's given back to you, actually, in terms of a yield. So every governor that's locking the algo is getting like 8% yield, so there's a motivation. And what the thing is that you need to vote to earn that yield. If you don't vote, you will not be able to earn that, actually. So it really is a very good system, how it's been done. So I just want to give that as a data point. The second one, what Mike's talking about, the real world use cases. So we are talking about like putting the wireless network, like for example, the 5G, or putting air quality sensors, or putting the weather station at your home, or even going and putting like webcam in the street corner or anywhere like that, so that you can get certain information about the geo things, right? Again, there's a privacy we have been talking. Can we mask people's image so that you don't interfere with the privacy, but you get the street data? Instead of Google going and creating a Google map, can we go and get a map in a decentralized manner? And again, for doing that, you are compensated through that, and then the coordination among these people is done through the DAO. So you have a different blockchain protocol. Each one of them I'm talking about, like IoT network, or air quality sensors, or putting a dash cam. Each one is a separate blockchain protocol, but coordination is done through the DAO.
If I can make a reference yesterday, if you weren't here, the city of Shreveport is implementing these helium devices around to build out their own, both the municipal network and to solve for the digital divide, because this helium now has a 5G component, not just an IoT sensor component. And the CTO for Shreveport said, it is amazing to me that I've got a network that now is incentivized and allows the public to put up these devices themselves. And they grow and they densify the network, and now commercial businesses are involved because they see the value for their buildings using IoT, and it can also provide a way to close the divide. So Dyshaun, with the few minutes that we have left, if you could kind of close it out in a sense, how would a government then step into this? Like, what are the 1, 2, 3 things that they could do now? Like, what is the software we're looking at? And I also, if you could just kind of hit at, this wouldn't necessarily exacerbate the digital divide, because a lot of what I think comes out in this conversation are things that seem to have to have a lot more digital awareness, more digital skills, and how can we avoid that by implementing a DAO?
Absolutely. So there's several steps. One of the main things is accessibility. I think you always have to design for accessibility. Karla said it best, actually, from the idea of volunteering is a privilege. Well, I think democracy is a privilege as well. And I think we're all familiar with the term of the silent majority, right? Most of us just don't get to participate because it may be schedules, it may be money, it may be whatever barriers, you just don't get to participate. So this technology, I really look at a DAO as, just look at it as a tool to close that, or to make civic engagement more accessible. And the easiest way to actually implement that, because from my experience, you cannot walk into any city hall and say, implement a blockchain and implement a DAO. They're just not ready.
Get out.
Right? So I actually want to point over to Mark. He coined this term that I love very much, the concept of Web 2.5. And to use an analogy, it's a hybrid model. So if we think back maybe 15, 20 years ago, we all were in combustible gas cars, right? But then the concept of an electric car came out. If we look around the road today, there's still not 100% electric cars. And if you look at the data actually says there's more hybrid cars on the road than there are fully electric. So it's this incremental process where particularly governments and us as developers of these technologies, we need to keep in mind that incremental process. So even with MetroDAO, I'll be fully transparent with you. The first version of the app is not on the blockchain, because it's more about the process, it's more about the accessibility, it's more about being able to convince leaders in terms that they are familiar with, participatory budgeting, closing communication gaps, and then basically using the blockchain as a later on feature. In my mind, it becomes a bell or a cherry, on the cake, and that's the same thing with a DAO. Essentially, anyone here that's advocating or looking to build, just remember it's a tool. It's a tool, and if you can incorporate systems that people are already used to, you'll have that much more success in getting others to adopt it.
So it's figuring out how to adapt this and then adopt it for use and slowly scaling.
Absolutely, the slow scale. You get people comfortable, and then you can initiate new features as you move along and the technology advances.
Well, more to come on this topic. I think our next iteration of Smart City USA is going to have to include this again, and we'll get in a little bit deeper. I want to thank the panelists for joining us and coming all this way. We thank you for attending.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.